Hello, everyone. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 27th of November, 2024, and I'm ECM. We're going to talk about the tariff situation, even though, as I've said the last couple of broadcasts, he's not the president yet. No tariffs have yet been imposed. But there's a lot of questions about this and about his authority in relation to it. And so we'll go through some of that today. And then I have a lot of questions about, like the response to this from Mexico and a few other questions that are really significant about post-election burnout. So we have some stuff to talk about today. I'm really glad you guys are here. I hope everybody's getting ready for your own Thanksgiving celebrations and the like. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing a camel-colored sweater that's ribbed and has some patterns in it. My hair is down. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I am in my office in front of my oak cabinet and a stack of books in my plant and some other stuff. And I have some presents for a family member whose birthday is coming up on my chair behind me. Nice to see you all. And I'm coming to you, as always, from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Okay, so Trump has threatened these enormous tariffs against Canada, Mexico, and China. And the questions that we got this morning on the Patreon feed concern whether or not Trump actually has the authority to do this. Okay, so I have to take you guys through the sort of like legal history of this because it's kind of complex. Historically, the right to impose tariffs belonged to Congress. However, Congress delegated the authority in certain specific circumstances to the president to impose tariffs when those circumstances are met. Now, there are very big questions. First of all, there's about 5 laws under which the president in certain circumstances could impose a tariff. Things related to national security, things related to, goods that aren't good for Americans, things of that nature, okay? It's unclear, and this is one of the things that's just like so insane about the rationale for these purported incoming tariffs, is that it's unclear whether or not the rationale that Trump is giving satisfies any of these particular statutes that would give him the authority to do it. All right. And one of the questions that then raises is if he tries to impose them, is there going to be pushback in the courts? Because I will just tell you that at least from the laws that I was looking at this morning, there's nothing that says that you have the unilateral authority as the president to impose tariffs because you think there's too many immigrants coming into America or because you're trying to stop alleged trafficking of fentanyl. Now, I have to point out also that neither one of those two things rises to the level of satisfying any massive national security concern. We know that like 83% or something in the 80s, I think it's 83% of the fentanyl that comes into the United States is brought in by American citizens. We also know that unlawful border crossings are way down right now. And so the idea that there's some huge emergency is actually in many ways like a fabricated justification for this terrible economic policy that Trump himself doesn't understand. Sherilyn Ifill was pointing out this morning on social media that back in September, Trump thought that what it was essentially a way of raising money where he would get money from other countries if he imposed a tariff. He himself doesn't even understand how it works. And so what we seem to have here is some kind of backtracking on this idea of tariffs that has no justification and that is terrible economic policy to somehow justify it. And we've seen people like, Bill Ackerman and others who are like far right-wing Trumper Wall Street people trying to find ways to say this really isn't as bad as it looks. When the reality is that it's going to raise prices on imported goods and Americans are going to pay the price. Okay. So whether or not he has the authority to do it is a huge question mark. And I'm going to remind you all of what I said yesterday, which I think is very important. Okay. Remember that during the first Trump administration, they floated trial balloons all the time. And when it was a policy that they thought might be disfavorable or something that people wouldn't like, they'd say, we're thinking about doing this. And then they would wait to see whether or not there was any pushback. And so this whole thing about tariffs may very well at this point be its version of a trial balloon. Okay. This administration's, the incoming administration's version of a trial balloon. And we'll have to see how it all plays out. However, the very good news is that the new president of Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, who I have developed a huge girl crush on in the last 24 hours, wrote a letter yesterday to Donald Trump that was essentially about the fact that Mexico will not take lightly to this idea and also recognizes that any issues related to immigration have to be addressed on an international level with cooperation between nations. And that further, if America just stopped spending so much money on war and instead invested in peace and stability, we really wouldn't be having any problem with any of these issues that Donald Trump thinks are major issues and sometimes are not. So we have a very serious pushback from the president of Mexico here. It was a very pithy letter. It was very smart. And it also basically said, like, we will deal with you in our own way, which may mean counter tariffs, if and when you seek to impose these things. So she's not having any of his nonsense. And I would encourage you to go find the English translation of that letter. I posted it, I think, yesterday on Blue Sky and also reposted it on Threads, I'm pretty sure, because it's hilarious and a true back check. And also, it will drive him crazy because it's, a woman who's the president of Mexico giving him a piece of her mind. But on top of it, it's a really, in some sense, it's a really strong pushback on all of the racist mythology that Trump puts out about Mexico generally, that it's not a world nation, that it's, that people are just like flooding over the border. She talked in that letter about Mexico's own response to immigration and how they have dealt with it when people are coming to the southern border of the United States. Just absolutely brilliant. And so having her in a position of power in Mexico as pushback against him is going to make him crazy, but also is a very strong sign on the international front that international leaders are not going to put up with his BS. So I very much appreciated it. I will tell you all, I don't like to come on here and say anything scary, but there's an article that just dropped in Rolling Stone about a half an hour ago. This is, again, one of those moments where I just have to laugh because it's so insane, where apparently the reporting is that Donald Trump's team have been considering ways to invade Mexico over the last few weeks. For God knows what reason, right? It just seems to make literally no sense. There's like a part of me that just thinks like they're just looking for war, right? And, that there's a part of this that is just an ongoing exercise in warmongering xenophobia. But it's lunacy. I mean, the idea that we would attack Mexico is lunacy. And also, I will just say that I don't think there's much of an appetite for this along the southern border of the United States of America among like the general population. So just want you all to be aware that it's out there. And, somebody asked a question in the comments as this was floating by, like, haven't his people explained all of this to him? Haven't they explained tariffs to him? That I suppose there's a question about, have they not explained to him, like, that you can't just randomly, unilaterally decide to invade Mexico, right? I will just tell you that, again, I have to remind you all that incompetence was one of the two key features that characterized the first administration. And I also want everybody to remember that he doesn't listen to any of his advisors, right? He gets crazy ideas and then he attempts to carry them out, or he just can't stand the idea of weakness and therefore acts in ways that he thinks make him appear strong. Okay. And sometimes end up making him the laughingstock of the nation, like drawing on a map of a hurricane with a Sharpie. So just keep this all in mind. All right. We still do not know how this is all going to play out. We don't know if the tariffs are actually going to come into play. I certainly hope that we don't invade Mexico, which would be an insane move. But, again, don't expect him to be acting rationally. There was some additional reporting yesterday that he's literally fed up with everybody and not listening to anyone except the woman who's been hired to follow him around and pump his ego, basically, with printouts of positive news. And he's not taking any advice from anyone. He's not listening to anyone. He's pissed off at the entire team. Let chaos reign. I have the image of that Elmo with the flames behind him in my head right now. Okay. I want to talk for a minute about, actually, before we move on to activist burnout, let me just mention one other thing. There's been a lot of questions on the Patreon feed in the last couple of days about the transition letters and the fact that Trump had refused to sign one of the transition letters with the Biden administration that would have required him to report on how he was spending that money. Yesterday, the Trump team finally did sign one of those letters. The one that requires them to report on how they're using money when they receive federal funds. However, they have still not signed the required transition letter with the FBI, which seems to be an indication that Trump is just simply going to hand out security clearances, which is his right once he's the president of the United States. Elections have consequences to everyone who he thinks he should have in his administration. Do I think that's wise or smart? No. We know that there are members of the Senate, including on the Republican side, who are saying that they will not confirm anyone who hasn't had an FBI background check, including Lisa Murkowski. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. But he has at least signed one of the transition letters now. Okay, on the issue of activist burnout, we had a couple of people this morning on the feed, the Patreon feed, who were really just struggling and also feeling guilty about maybe not doing any mobilizing where they lived right now in anticipation of what was coming because they're just so exhausted. So I have to remind you all that, like, that's a totally normal response to what just happened. Those of you who are in the Dual Power Accelerator, which closed yesterday, know that we're spending a week here, like, working on grief and loss, right? And part of that is because it's really critical for us to acknowledge the emotional responses that we have had to the election, all right? And I want people to understand that there is nothing wrong with taking a break, right? I am worried about having a short window here to get ready for what's coming, but at the same time, there is no obligation on anybody to continue doing anything if your physical and your emotional health is at risk. And this is particularly true for people who are caregivers, which was the case with one of the people who was talking about this on the Patreon feed this morning. Just remember, you know, that wonderful metaphor that I use all the time of, like, the flock of geese, right? There's one goose that has to be at the front, cutting through the headwinds, and the other geese are behind that goose, like, cheering them on, honk, 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 right? And then that goose will fall out of the formation, and another goose will go to the front to break the headwinds, and they all cheer them on, honk, 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 honk. And if one goose can't continue because they're too tired or whatever, that goose will land. A couple of the geese from the flock will stay with it until that goose is ready to continue to carry on, okay? No one has to be at the front of the herd, so to speak, the front of the flock all the time. And one of the things that I also want to remind you all of when we talk about things like community-based organizing is that you don't just get to, like, lead that or be a part of it. You also get to receive it, right? Like, the point of community-based organizing and community organizing, when it's done well within the ideas of dual power and mutual aid, is that you get to receive help when you need it. You don't have to just keep pouring from an empty cup, so to speak, right? When you're the one who's struggling, there are people there to support you also, right? So there should be no guilt at this moment if you are feeling too burnt out to do anything, right? And in fact, I would argue that it's better for what's coming, for the community-based work that we're going to have to do, the mobilization we're going to have to do, the power building from the ground up that we're going to have to do, to have everybody rested if they need it, right? To me, I want people to just understand that political burnout is real and political grief is real. And there's nothing wrong with you if you're feeling at this moment like you're too exhausted to do any of that kind of mobilization work. And I would say, like, take a week or two, take a month, you know, like, take what you need to feel like you've got your energy back. And if that means stepping away from mainstream news, right? If it means stepping away from organizations for a time until you feel ready to continue, if it means that right now you have to prioritize the health and well-being of your family, go do that, right? There should be no guilt in this. Like, you know, and this is life, you know, and the best organizers that I've ever met, you know, like, including people, names you would all recognize and people that I really admire, those folks take 6 months off sometimes after a major organizing event. They still got a toe in the water. They still know what's going on. But if they've got a major loss in their life, a family member passes away, or a family member gets sick, or they themselves get sick, they don't continue doing the work, right? They take a break. Like, everybody knows that it must be done. No one can keep going at an endlessly crazy pace. So if it's you right now who's feeling exhausted and tired, take the break. And I'm going to point out, I think this is very common for a lot of people right now. Like, I've watched as our live viewership, which, you know, like, around the election and a couple of days after it was, like, sitting at like 3,000. Right now we're at 11:15. Okay. And that's great, because what that tells me is that people are taking the break when they need to, and they will come back when they're ready, right? There are ebbs and flows and cycles to all of this, and it's okay, all right? The rest of us who are feeling prepared and ready will step up, okay? And, you know, maybe this is the other thing I'll just say, like, it is a holiday. It's okay to take a break from this stuff and just enjoy time with your family, right? Enjoy time with people who care about you. Maybe it's found family. It's okay to do that, all right? we don't have to push ourselves to the point of breaking. And if we do, actually, we're kind of, contradicting everything that we stand for, which really should be about building communities of care and love and making sure that we're taking care of one another, right? That includes, by the way, taking care of ourselves. All right. So that's my 2 cents on that. Okay. I have to talk for 1 second about the issue of no-fault divorce, because I've gotten a lot of questions about this in the last couple of days. You will recall, hopefully, or maybe not, that Project 2025 set on its agenda the end of no-fault divorce. And part of that is because there is a really retrogressive white Christian nationalist view, documented in Project 2025, that the only legitimate family is a family where a man is married to a woman and the man works to support the family and the wife stays home, and where divorce is disfavored because they've got this worldview that, that traditional family unit is going to lead to greater breeding of white babies. Okay. I'm generalizing a lot here, but that's generally the message of it. Okay. One of the things that they have flagged as a result of that is the potential end to no-fault divorce. Now, for anyone who doesn't understand how no-fault divorce works, essentially no-fault divorce allows you to walk into divorce court and say, I want a divorce from this person for any reason whatsoever. Okay. And that does not mean that, one of the things that it means is that you don't have to put on evidence of adultery, right? You don't have to put on evidence of anything else under the traditional law that would have allowed you to get a divorce, right? Like extreme violence. Okay. And no-fault divorce is kind of a recent thing. By the way, in the state of New York, there was no no-fault divorce until 2010. 2010. Okay. So the end of no-fault divorce means very bad things, because the other thing that the end of no-fault divorce means is that you can't get out of an abusive marriage when you want to, because you have to hire a lawyer and prove that there's a basis for ending the marriage. All right. It also generally could impact things like alimony, like whether or not you, as somebody who perhaps gave up a career to stay home and raise children, would be entitled to alimony. And that will depend on how no-fault divorce laws were erased and what came in their place. But I have very serious concerns, right? You all know that, because I've talked about this, I've had my own history of abusive relationships, unfortunately. And the idea that you would not be able to get a divorce, right, without proof of something justifying the end of the marriage would take us back to the 1950s and far earlier, when, by the way, the suicide rate for wives was like 20% higher than it is right now. Okay. And part of that is because there is, you're trapped fundamentally. There's a means by which this is a very patriarchal way of setting up marriage so that you can't leave it, even if you're being really badly abused. Okay. And I'm worried about it. And I'm not the only person who's flagged this. There's apparently an article in the Daily Mail about this from yesterday that Molly Jong-Fast posted. But I've been talking about this, honestly, since the election and before it, that, if you think you're going to need a divorce anytime in the next few years, it would be wise to actually file now. Okay. Now, there are lawyers who will say, as one lawyer did to me this morning on Blue Sky, that family law is handled by the states. Okay. And that's generally true. Divorce and family law, custody, alimony, child support, all those sorts of things are generally handled under state law. But if nationwide legislation was passed through the House and the Senate and signed into law by Donald Trump that eliminated no-fault divorce nationwide, just like a nationwide abortion ban, okay, that would control what the states could then do. And there's a legal doctrine related to this called preemption. What that essentially means is that where the federal government, like the Congress and our federal system, has taken control of a certain area of law, state law cannot contradict it. All right. So one of the things that you need to just be really clear on here is that if they follow through on this threat, no-fault divorce could end nationwide. And yes, it's speculation, right? Again, I have to remind you all, he's not the president. I have some good news about the House coming up. Who knows how this would play out. All right. But when we talk about things that we need to do to prepare and to protect ourselves, I don't want anybody in an abusive marriage, first and foremost, but I really don't want people trapped in one, because the law says you have to stay put unless you can prove that there's a reason to leave it. Right. So So, we'd have to see how that played out. Again, I just have to point out, yes, it would probably be challenged under constitutional grounds, but there's a very plain argument that when the federal government takes control of an area of law, that's the end of it for the states, right? And I know this is contradictory to like the whole states' rights thing that the far right wing has been riding on for like years. And yet, hypocrisy is meaningless to the far right. And I personally will just tell you that I wouldn't put it past them to try it. Because we know they're coming for birth control, right? We know they want to pass a nationwide abortion ban. And, assuming that they have the votes to do it, they could try. So this is sort of like a prophylactic recommendation on my part, right? But I will just tell you, I don't know, man. I put nothing past these people when it comes to regulating women in our bodies. So that's my 2 cents on that. Okay. Some very good news is that, and you'll be shocked by this because of all the doomsaying about how this election went and everything else. Looks like the Democrats are going to pick up 2 seats in the House compared to like how the House is currently made up. Meaning that with the vacated seats from the nominations to the cabinet and senior leadership positions, the makeup of the House right now looks like it's going to be 217 to 215 until those seats are filled. That's 2 votes. That's like nothing, right? And that's because there is another one of these district elections in California. The Democratic candidate has now pulled ahead, and it looks like that seat's going to flip. We talked about Derek Tran yesterday, which was amazing. That seat is officially flipped. Michelle Steele is going home. But the other one we were waiting on now looks like the Dems going to pull it out. So this actually, I just have to point this out. All this speculation out there that's like, oh, the Democratic Party is dead and they totally screwed it up and they should have been talking to people more and blah, 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 blah. Like in very unusual circumstances in this election, we can never discount the effects of white supremacist patriarchy on anything. And also, we picked up 2 seats in the House. Like it's going to be a tighter margin than it was before. So the idea that this was like a mandate, right? Is a real stretch. And I'm also just going to say that I'll tell you that I think there are some Republicans in that caucus that are not going to go for all these like far right wing policies that are currently being floated. So we'll have to see, but it also means if anybody gets sick or anybody's absent or somebody has surgery or somebody comes down with, God forbid, cancer, that House is not going to be like in the hands of Republican power. So again, keep this in mind. All right. Things are not as bad in some circumstances as they're being made out to be. And again, we've really got to just clearly understand that we do have levers of power that we're going to be able to use. All right. Is it ideal? No. Is it perfect? No. Is it the outcome that I wanted? No, absolutely not. And simultaneously, I'm going to take those small wins because I'll tell you what, a 2-seat majority in the House is nothing. It's truly nothing. I'm not to me, that's something that could very easily kick the can down the road on most of Trump's wild ideas. All right. So let's see how it plays out. But I'm feeling quite positive about that right now. And, we have to be grateful for the wins when we get them. All right. Okay. I want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. I'm not going to be here tomorrow or Friday. There will be a progressive coffee hour this weekend for our Patreon subscribers. So if you want to get in on that on Saturday, you can become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive. I do also just want to say this. Okay. I know that some of you are having to gather. We talked about this and laughed about it a little bit on the broadcast earlier this week with family members who are MAGA. All right. I will just let you know that Priya Parker, who is married to a non-Girid artist and is in her own right, an incredible author and advocate. She focuses her work on gathering as a larger concept, all right? Has written a great piece about how to cool down temperatures at the holidays with crazy relatives that is on both my Threads feed this morning and also on my Blue Sky feed. And you should go read it if that happens to be you, because she made some very good suggestions. And I will also just encourage you all, because, I think a lot of you know how I feel about gratitude practices generally, that we do one with my kids every night at the dinner table. It is really important to be grateful for what we've got. And, I know things can feel very hopeless in this moment, but I can guarantee you, and the research is there to back me up, that when we practice gratitude for good things, our outlook improves and we feel better and our mental health improves. So I do want to encourage you to just make sure that you find time to be grateful for something. over the next couple of days. All right. So lots of love to all of you. I'm wishing you a wonderful time. I hope it's peaceful. I hope it's good food. I hope you get to spend some time with family and friends who you love. I will catch you all back here on Monday at regular time, if not before, on our Patreon feed. And I'm going to try over the next few days to be a little less present on social media. Y'all know I can never like extract myself completely, but I'm going to make an effort because I also really need some rest. And I'm finding myself like waking up even tired. So I have to be mindful of my own burnout also. All right. I will see you all here on Monday. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Enjoy your time. And let's hopefully come back feeling a little bit refreshed and ready for the battle ahead. All right. I'll see you guys soon. Take care, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. All right. Bye.